I don't want this council to be pitched against each other all the time and wasting time. Mr. Lam Cheuk-ting, some time ago, I went with Dr. Junius Ho to attend a seminar of Westminster so we could learn about traditional UK politics and parliamentary operations. Towards the end of the seminar, someone asked me, what is the reference value of that seminar to Hong Kong? And I said honestly that basically there is none. And I was asked, why none? Because I said the UK Parliament was a democratically elected parliament. People go by the rules of procedure in conducting business in the council. And they all know very well today the Conservative Party is the ruling party, but tomorrow it could be the Labour Party who is the ruling party. So they alternate, and that's why everybody will respect each other. And the rules they set are the gentleman's agreement. But in Hong Kong, it is not the case. In Hong Kong, our council is not democratic. In the foreseeable future, we don't see any chance for democratic reform. Under the circumstance, the pro-establishment camp remains the majority. They believe the functional constituency system could last forever. Their vested interests could be protected. And they believe they could continue to be the majority in this council. That's why as soon as the opportunity arises for them to amend the rules of procedure, they will take full advantage of that opportunity. They won't miss out. The pro-establishment camp might think that there are some controversial issues, and the Pan-Democrats make use of the procedure to block things or stall things, and that will affect our day-to-day operation. Yes, I get that. But that's exactly the only power for the minority to check the majority in council that's not democratic. Now you want to take away that bit of power we have, and then you think you can rule this council? No. As I said yesterday, you could amend the rules of procedure as you wish, but you cannot stamp out all procedural motions or procedural issues. This kind of filibustering to block the government would not come to an end because you amend the rules of procedure. Mr. Martin Liao is from the legal sector. He should know very well the importance of systems and institutions. The system we have is to allow members to fully express their views. In addition, it is to allow members to follow up on major scandals or political or policy blunders on the part of the government. But regrettably, Mr. Martin Liu is moving amendments on behalf of the pro-establishment camp to lower the threshold for setting up a select committee under the petition rule from 35 to 20, from 20 to 35. And even if there are 35 members rising to support the petition, the matter will only be referred to the House Committee. As you all know, the House Committee's majority is again the pro-establishment camp. So, in effect, That means the Democratic camp will lose this power to pursue major scandals or issues of major public interest through the means of petition. And how is this procedure relevant to the filibustering, which is the subject of criticisms of the pro-establishment camp? I've been asking the pro-establishment camp about that. None could tell me how the petition rule is related to filibustering, because it is not. Mr. Paul TSE, you could respond when it's your turn to speak, okay? Now, setting up a select committee through a petition takes just a few minutes in the council. And the work of the select committee certainly would not stand in the way of the work of the council, the finance committee, or any other important committees, because it is standalone select committee. So I just don't get it. Well, you say that the select committee would take up so much resources and manpower of the secretariat. But that is the cost we have to pay if we are to monitor the government. If you ask the public about it, whether we should spend some public resources to investigate into C.Y. Leung's UGL case, well, I would think it's only reasonable. Now, members use all sorts of distorted arguments or specious arguments to try to explain themselves, but they remain twisted arguments. They cannot convince people because they do not represent the truth. These are false arguments. The loyalists complain complain about tyranny of the minority, but we're the minority. How can we be the tyrants? I think Mr. Martin Liu is being really funny. So how can we be the tyrant? Because the president is part of you, the government is part of you, the NPC Standing Committee is your head. They can interpret the basic law. In Hong Kong, we have an executive-led government. So how is it that the minority camp could, be the tyrant? So that you're trying to confuse people. The minority camp uses procedures to try to monitor or exercise check and balance on the government. And as the former President Jasper Zhang said, under the one country, two systems, opposition is allowed. The opposition camp could make use of procedures to block the passage of government bills and motions. And it is not something unique to Hong Kong. It's there in many other countries. And it's not just the Democrats who would do that. In the past, the loyalists have also resorted to filibustering, though it's done rather clumsily. Last time for the constitutional reform, they wanted to wait for Uncle Fat. They all went out, only just a few stayed and stylily cried after. That's because you did it in such a clumsy manner, so you couldn't really blame others. You don't have free will, you just follow the flock, and you don't do a good job in voting in support of the constitutional reform just because you wanted to wait for Uncle Fat. You can't blame anybody for the blunder. Now, even Lau Kong-wah said in interviews before that filibustering is also means for the pro-established camp. So everybody could do it. Sometimes you want to block certain motions. The voters also resorted to filibustering. Now, with these changes to the rules of procedure, would destroy the very delicate balance in this council. Okay, fine, if you want to destroy that balance so there is no longer balance in this council, there will just be confrontation and conflicts in this council, and they will become worse and worse. President, you told the press why there's need to have more meetings so that this council could resume to the normal state as soon as possible. You said the Democrats also put forward many amendments. But actually, the meeting schedule has nothing to do with the amendments proposed by the Democrats, because the other sides also moved many amendments. So you are trying to confuse the truth. Why do we have a large number of amendments? Because they are in response to the amendments moved by Mr. Martin Liu, and you know exactly that the amendments moved by the Pan-Democrats will have no chance to be passed. Only the amendments moved by the pro-establishment camp could be passed. So the fact is that you are supposed to be the referee, but then you get onto the turf and you play for the pro-establishment camp. So you have relinquished the neutral role that a referee should have, at least on the surface. I must criticize Mr. Martin Liu too. That is, the Secretariat would preside over the election of the President for a new term. In the past, it's the member, the most senior member, who would preside over the meeting, the election. It is a tradition of this council and it's worked well. Why do you want to make this change? Is it because all the senior members in this council now from the Democratic camp, and that's why you don't trust them? You want the Secretary General to preside over the election. But I think there's a serious conflict of role for the Secretary General to do that. The Secretary General has to preside over the election of the President. The President of the Council is also the Chairman of the Electoral Commission, and the Electoral Commission manages the Secretariat. On a day-to-day basis, the Secretary General has to report to the President on the work of the Secretariat. So the President is the direct supervisor of the Secretary General. So you have subordinate presiding over the election of the boss. That's in itself a conflict of roles. Now, Mr. Martin Liu is a senior lawyer with legal training, and he's put forward such an option. I think that's undermining the solemnity of this council. Now, Mrs. Regina Yip arose yesterday to support our petition, while you were unable to convince Ms. Yong Hai-yan to join you. But you must also agree, therefore, that the petition is an important tool for us to monitor the governor. So I hope you will consider changing a position. Of course, if you could convince Ms. Yong Hai-yan to follow your lead, then as the New People's Party, then it would be even better.
But I noticed that Ms. Yeung said to the media that Mrs. Regina Yip is heavyweight enough and there was no need for her to rise as well. Ms. Yeung, please listen to my advice. You should not belittle yourself. You're also a member of this council. You sit next to Mrs. Regina Yip. Your vote carries equal weight as hers. So use the rise, and it's important. Why should you shirk all your responsibility to Mrs. Yip? Unless you didn't agree to her position, unless you disagree, then presentation of a petition should be used as a way to look into the selling off of properties by link REIT. If that's the case, you might as well make clear that you don't agree with Mrs. Yip, and therefore I didn't rise yesterday. Please don't say that Mrs. Yip, by herself is heavyweight is a heavyweight. In fact, your directly returned members represent NT East. Mrs. Yip doesn't represent voters of NT East. She doesn't receive your pay on your behalf. Mr. WU Chi-wai. President, this morning I said that the value and principle of the ROP is a spirit of equality and to ensure the rights of the minority here. I said this morning that the rights of the minority is the distinction between the democratic camp and the pro-establishment camp. There is no guarantee that tomorrow the New People's Party and the DP may jointly present a petition to support or to preserve the rights of the community. Even within the democratic camp, we have views on the way members handle electrical business. In the issue of filibustering, all along the DP's position is filibustering is a tool we should not resort to lightly. It should only be used when we're faced with issues of great concern and very controversial within the community. It's just like the co-location arrangement. We had our worries, and the coming legislation on Article 23 again, we have our worries. But as I said, very often our position might differ from members from the same camp. This is because we also have our disagreements within the democratic camp, but then we should not do anything to suppress the rights of the minority. The reason being, today is me. Tomorrow you may face the same fate. We may all face with the same situation, and we don't know when it will happen. We don't know whether the reward you get, the support you get today will last forever. Because once the ROP are amended, there is no turning back, because we have split voting mechanism here. And therefore, the pro-establishment camp would like to take advantage of the fact that 6 members from us have been disqualified. Without this situation, I believe you would not have proposed any resolution to amend the ROPs, because that would be futile and you might as well save some breath. Even if you want to amend the rules of procedure, you would submit it to the CROP first for detailed deliberations first, because amendments to the ROP should only be done when there is consensus among various political parties and groups in this council. It is only by so doing that we can all feel convinced. And this is to ensure that we can carry out our duties and functions as set out in Article 75 of the Basic Law, and that we can monitor the executive. It's been 20 years since the handover. Under one country, 2 systems, we should perhaps ask ourselves once again, why was one country, 2 systems proposed by the central authorities when it planned to regain sovereignty over Hong Kong? This is because many of us here have witnessed the frequent political struggles within the mainland after the 1949, there was the Cultural Revolution and other things, and we feared that the communist system would be introduced to Hong Kong, and that gave rise to a confidence crisis. And one country, two systems was proposed as a solution to resolve the political crisis. So the basic law gives us a system so that the legislature can monitor the executive to ensure that its administration operates smoothly. And the rules of procedure is also a tool for us to monitor the government, to provide checks and balances, to ensure that there won't be policies that do not get the support of the community. And that is the beauty of checks and balances. However, the amendments to the ROP will upset this balance. In the last 20 years, after the handover, at all times, we have more members from the pre-establishment camp in this council than us. If we use a football game as an example, you have more football players than we have in the field. Since you have so many footballers, we have no choice but to fully utilize the rules of the game here, so as to a goalkeeper, to at least you will not score a goal first. This is a very basic, and I think this is the basic rule of the game. However, for the pre-establishment camp, when they saw that we had a few footballers disqualified, they asked the referee to have the rules of the game changed. Furthermore, in the process, they wanted to ensure that the game would not end before the rules have been changed. So the way they changed the rules of the game, the way they play this game, how can you feel that everything is fine? If you think that everything is in order in this council, then perhaps we have returned to the state of one country, one system, because members in this council do not treasure or value their own rights. They don't appreciate that with amendments to the rules here, and should there be a change in the political scenario in the mainland, they may also suffer as well. When the rights of the minority are being stripped off by the majority, then someone from the majority may one day become the minority. In the mainland, in Beijing, they are tackling the low-end population. We don't know whether you who are supposed to be on the high end may become low end in the future. You can only rely on the system, and defending the system is core to one country, two systems. And that will also enable the public to continue to have hope and expectation for this council. President, the nature of the rules of procedure, is at the end of the day is just a tool. It is to ensure that large-scale business can be conducted smoothly. After 2 rounds of elections, and the outcome of these elections is a reflection of public opinion. Some we used to have members here who were very arrogant and buoyant and rather radical. They acted as if they could control this council, but because of a change in the attitude of electors, the way we handle matters have changed according to the choice of voters. The choice or the wish of voters can be represented or can be reflected in this council. However, you have not treasured the room, this room. At this stage, you insist on amending the rules of procedure. As I said, you may regard yourself as belonging to the high end or medium end of the population, but tomorrow you may suddenly realize that you are at the low end, and by then your regrets will be too late. Since this council cannot monitor the executive anymore, the pro-establishment camp may say that, well, we know how to monitor the government. We know how to ensure proper administration. It's just that we will not do it the way the pan-democratic members do. Well, I agree to remember when we had the eight-party coalition. If members of this council could, in concert, raise our views and aspirations to the community, if we can think of a way to resolve livelihood issues, well, back then we succeeded in forcing the government to act. But of course, I understand that after the coalition was formed, some members from the pro-establishment camp got a talking to, and they subsequently decide that it's not possible to do so. How can we unite and come up with solutions and force the government to act according to our wish? Is that your political ethics? In fact, the crux of the matter is we have to be accountable to the public. How can we turn a blind eye to the fact that our money from our public coffers is being thrown into the sea or go down the drains? How can we just let hundreds of billions of dollars to go down the drains? You have to remember that not all of us are from the engineering sector. Not all of us are Mr. Loy Kwok. We come from different sectors. And of course, we're entitled to our own views. You think that the co-location arrangement is efficient and a perfect arrangement, but I'm afraid that will open the back door to national laws. How am I wrong? If Rimsky-Yuen is willing to promise to us that that would be the only case, it will not be a precedent, perhaps some of us in the democratic camp might change our mind. But then he did not make any undertaking, and now the central authorities were saying that even Article 50 is not applicable. Now we would rather pay this price, whether the XRL became a slow rail so as not to undermine one country, two systems.
It's a matter of your values, but you see things only from the economic perspective. It's all right whether or not we have one country, two systems, as long as all the back doors are readily open. If there are economic benefits, that we should do it. Now, Mr. President, if we no longer have one country, two systems, if we give up on our core values, will we still be an international city? Will we be able to attract investors along the Belt and Road countries to come and use Hong Kong as a bridgehead or the springboard for tapping the mainland market? If we lose this, we'll need to face competition from mainland cities such as Shanghai and Beijing. If we're forced to compete, we'll be facing even more pressure. That is why, about amendments to the ROP, we need to make sure that the legislature will be able to continue to monitor the government so that we can safeguard our core values, so that one country, two systems will be upheld in Hong Kong without distortion. I so submit, Mr. President. I also urge the pro-establishment camp to rethink. Call for quorum. Mr. Kin-yuen. Mr. President, now we're in this chamber, in this very solemn venue, when we discuss the rules of procedure. I think we all could feel the sentiment. That is, we must uphold the very important traditions of this Council in this solemn chamber. And we are saddened by the discussion that is going on in this chamber. What has become of the tradition of this Council? We know that this rules of procedure is the outcome of a collection of experience acquired for a long time. The ROP helps us so that we have orders to follow in this chamber, so that there is a way for us to manage our business, the speaking order, and the way how motions should be handled, and also the rights of individual members here. After we've been elected to become members of this Legislative Council, the ROP regulates or specifies the rights and obligations of members.
So if we are to change the rules of procedure, we must go through a cautious process. A few days ago, we received some former colleagues as guests here. One of them was Mr. Andrew Wong. He told me how the rules of procedure should be amended. Now, during his time, the rules of procedure was translated from English into Chinese. It was a lengthy and cautious process. So it took a long time to go through that process, and that's important. But now look at the 49 amendments to the rules of procedure. How much time has it taken for us to think through them, and how many of these amendments have not gone through any discussion and are then tabled here? So that's a sign, an important sign of this council being corrupted. We are against these amendments to the rules of procedure because we want to salvage this council. And I hope members here will think again carefully. What we're doing here now, are we helping this council to go back to the so-called right track, or are we hastening the demise of this council? I think there should be three principles in amending the rules of procedure. First, respect for the minority. There's bound to be a minority and a majority in any council. Now, if after the majority joins the council, they can do whatever they like, and they could change the rules of procedure in any way they want to enhance their own advantage, So, and then the minority is not able to perform their roles, then it's not a normal council, because the council has important function of exercising checks and balances on the government. And we need so many of us, not just one member. Why? Because together, through our number, we are able to reflect the views of the public. We're not the same as the executive. The executive needs one voice, but here we need different voices, and checking each other. So respecting the minority is the first important principle. The second principle is about respecting the established system. We see how the rules are worded in the rules of procedure, and this is a flagrant breach of those rules. We've never seen something like that in the whole history of this council. The third principle, as I said, there must be ample time to consider the proposals and strive for consensus. So it will take a long time to complete the process. Why must we complete all the 49 amendments before Christmas? If we couldn't complete these 49 amendments, who's saying that then we cannot go beyond Christmas? No, we should allow ample time for discussion. And each member has only 15 minutes to talk about 49 amendments. And this is a ridiculous arrangement. Now, I have proposed 2 amendments to the amendments of Mr. Martin Liao. That's the threshold for the petition, and also the arrangement for the third reading of the bill. These are 2 important issues, but I only have about 4 or 5 minutes for each of the amendment. Of course, it's not possible for me to explain myself clearly. First, on the threshold for petition, I think the proposal to raise the threshold to 35 is totally unreasonable. I think the threshold should be 1/4 of the whole council. This morning, Mr. Martin Liao has explained his amendments. Now, he's given a very important reason for his amendment, but they are simply not appropriate. He said that this arrangement is already outdated. That's why in the UK, this petition arrangement has been abolished. Rather, a petition is to be raised by the public. So, if the petition arrangement is outdated, then I think Mr. Martin Liao should suggest that we follow the practice of the UK, if that's what he's saying. So we should open up the petition system rather than tightening it as they are trying to do. He said in the UK, the petition mechanism is open to the public now. And for us, we are now tightening the petition mechanism so that there's the possibility of the pro-establishment camp monopolizing the petition arrangement. So if he's saying that we are not keeping up with the times, then maybe he's even more outdated in terms of his amendment. Well, we look at Germany. Now they have the federal committee has investigative powers. 1/4 of the members would be enough. 1/4 of the members could propose to set up an investigation committee. Why? If only the majority party has investigative powers, of course it won't investigate itself. Now, if we're talking about check and balance on those in power, that is, if there's any corruption in the government or other maladministration, then the minority must be able to initiate investigation. In Germany, much emphasis is put on the powers of the minority. In Europe, in other open and democratic parliaments, they attach great importance to the powers of the minority, and especially the powers of the minority to conduct investigation. Now, we are not able to set up select committee under the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. And here, with this petition arrangement require only the consent of 20 members, you want to take that power away as well. Then that means the power of this council to exercise check and balance on the government would be substantially curtailed. Now, you say your amendments are meant to stop filibustering, but what has petition got to do with filibustering? Nothing at all. You just try to undermine the powers of this council to monitor the government. As a result, the Democratic camp will no longer be able to monitor the government in this council. For example, investigation into Timothy Tong, or C.Y. Leung's UGL case, we will no longer be able to do that. Now, many of these examples have been quoted. I'm not going to repeat them. So I hope the pro-establishment camp would accept my proposal. I'm not saying that the threshold should be raised to 35. I'm saying to raise the threshold to a quarter. Another amendment I'm proposing to Mr. Martin Leo's amendment is about that debate not being allowed during the third reading of the bill. Now, before I comment on this, I would like to give my views on the way you handled this process, President. Now, this amendment has not gone through the three-step process. This morning, we said your decision is final, but your decision could be criticized or discussed when we speak. So we could give our views. Now, the Democratic camp has proposed some amendments. You said they must go through the three-step process. But then for other amendments, you believe there is no need to go through the three-step process. How can you be so unfair? President, you have the duty to sort this out and to correct this mistake. Now, these amendments have not been submitted to the Committee on Rules of Procedure for discussion, so there was no time to consider these amendments. How then could these amendments be tabled here? And we know passed too. Where is the consensus? Can the process be so careless? Now, we talk about no debate allowed during the third reading of a bill, but the third reading is such an important step of the legislative process. So how can we pass such an amendment so casually? This is outrageous. Now, President, we know there's the lengthy process to consider bills. Usually, by the time we get to the third reading of a bill, there won't be too much of a debate. But we could have a debate if we want to. In fact, in the past, during the third reading of a bill, the pro-establishment camp spoke. For example, the Tramways Amendment Bill 2015, at the time, Mr. Tony Chair, he's no longer a member, but at the time he was a member of the Loyalist camp. He spoke during the third reading of the bill. Mr. Yip Kok Him, Mr. Wong Ting Kwong spoke during the third reading of other bills. Now, each member has only 15 minutes to speak during the third reading of a bill. It's such a short speaking time. Why won't you allow it? I'm not saying that you cannot amend this arrangement, but I'm saying there must be careful consideration and discussion among members, then yes, we could change it if we want to. We could also look at the practices in other parliaments, and then if we do want to change this arrangement, yes, we could do it. But have we gone through such a process? When have we gone through this process? Members of the pro-establishment camp, President, have we ever had an in-depth and detailed discussion on this matter? Can you tell me? No, if we've never done so, then why is it that today at the Council we can make a decision on how we would amend the rules of procedure? Where is the dignity of the rules of procedure? I hope all members, including members of the Democratic camp, would all take amendments to the rules of procedure very seriously, and there must be adequate debate before we make any amendments. Your time is up.
Mr. Andrew Wen. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Just now, many members have actually spoken words from our mind, and I urge the Madam Deputy to be forbearing. After all, we only have 15 minutes each. Please do not too easily rule that we are being repetitive. And I have to vindicate our party chairman, Mr. WU Chi-wai. Mr. WU Chi-wai said this morning that when the rabbit is dead, the dog would be cooked, and they was criticized. And then Mr. Wu withdrew his remarks. He said that he was not really referring to Mr. Paul TSE. In fact, Mr. Wu is too cautious, like me. There is no need for him to withdraw such remarks, because Mr. TSE and also some other members could mesh up to that metaphor, because we all know the source of that fable. That is when a certain person has made his contribution, and after the mission is accomplished, he can be disposed of. So it's actually positive, carries positive sense. And I don't know why Mr. Paul TSE was so upset this morning, but now he looks rather calm. Perhaps after he has heard the source of that tale, he is not so upset now. In fact, I think many of us here can mesh up to that metaphor. Well, I have not brought along with me that whistle. In fact, Madam Deputy, for that black whistle, so to speak, it is mainly for the President. The media asked me how come I haven't brought along my whistle today. I said there is no need, because we all know the style of the President and how he makes a bad call very easily, and he has double-standard his different yardstick, so that the amendments to the rules of procedure can be passed. I think the President as well as Madam Deputy have shown more patience. Perhaps you are now more certain, and there is no need for you to play foul. And you're quite sure that your mission can be accomplished. Mr. WU Chi-wai talked about the companion to the history and rules and practices of the Council. Of course, there have been amendments to the rules of procedure in the past, but the greatest difference this time is in the past, usually amendments to the rules were only made after there was discussion and consensus among various political parties in this council, and it was first discussed in the Committee on ROP before they were passed in the council. And rarely would we do it this way. That is, when views are so polarized, they bulldoze through the amendments to the rules of procedure. They've forgotten that the rules of procedure is supposed to be neutral, because once elected, all members here have the opportunity to be chairman of a committee, a panel, or the council. The rules of procedure is a yardstick for all of us to chair meetings. Unfortunately, interpretation or judgment of the rules of procedure has been rather subjective recently, and that has make things rather ridiculous. And sometimes the standard adopted this time will be different from the last. Anyway, we have the right to protest when you're doing this way, and even members of the public can ridicule you. But they are now bulldozing through these amendments raised by Mr. Martin Liu. As a result, our rights to monitor the government and to discharge our functions as legislators will be greatly eroded and undermined. In particular, I'm most concerned about the double standard adopted by the president, and that can lead to the crisis of being unconstitutional. In particular, that is about lowering the quorum for a committee of the whole council to be lowered from 35 to 20. Now, there are two schools of thoughts. You're lucky you are able to find another school of thought. But as legislators, we should stick to our conventions and practices to ensure that we will not be wavering in our standards. We have consulted two legal advisors ourselves, and both said that to change the quorum in that way would be unconstitutional. But Mr. Martin Liu, as a member of such high standing, even the president has to give him face. So he has got another piece of legal advice saying that a committee of the whole council is a different structure, and it's okay to lower the number of members to form a quorum to 20. This is a very risky move, and I don't know why he is so hostile towards the quorum requirements. Now, when I call them pro-establishment camp, I think is a positive description. The Western District like you. Now, well, you are the loyalists. You can, if you have enough members here, there is no need. Although we asked for a quorum crawl these 2 days. Well, very soon afterwards, the president told us that we had a quorum, so it's okay. So why do you still want to amend the quorum rule? Because you want to be lazy. Well, you may say, why aren't you here in this chamber? You know, we are at war. If we had really left, you would be most happy. Because we all know, all of us are keeping a very close watch over the proceedings. Mr. Abraham Sheikh nodded. We met very often at the antechamber. We greeted one another. So we were involved in the proceedings in just at a different place in the antechamber. So we want you to do your duty, to do your part as loyalists, but you refuse to do so. All right, the president wants to ensure that only 20 of you remain in your seats, so that for things that may undermine the interests of the public can be passed. I think you are not doing justice to your boss by being so lazy. There are two characteristics in the amendments by the pro-establishment camp. First, to increase the powers of the president. It's strange. All amendments for us to curtail the powers of the president have been ruled out of order, and they've also greatly undermined the functions of this legislature to monitor executive. One example is the issue of petitions. I don't want to be too long-winded on this issue, as many members have commented on this. Yesterday was an excellent example, and for those who have watched our webcast, would know that we had a select committees set up by means of petitions or by invoking the LCPNP ordinance to investigate matters of grave public interest. Without the presentation of a petition, we wouldn't have set up a select committee to look into C.Y. Leung's UGL case and also the arguments that followed and the disputes that followed. Last week, I was rather agitated when I referred to that. I think you can't say that You can't say that having a petition to set up a select committee is useless. I think without this mechanism, then in this legislature, which is rather undemocratic because of unfair electoral system, we will not be able to monitor the government properly. Yesterday, Mrs. Regina Ip supported our petition to set up a select committee to look into the selling off of properties by Link REIT, and Mrs. Regina Ip rose to support us. I hope that when it comes to voting on this item, she would follow her conscience and vote against the proposed amendment. Now, there are many examples to show how unfair it is. I just want the community to understand that we want to do things with decorum. The president, and even the president, I'm sorry, I don't really want to blame the secretariat because I don't know whether the secretariat is under great pressure, whether they have received orders to act in this way. For instance, Mr. WU Chi-wai, our party chairman, proposed an amendment which was ruled out of order by the president. It's strange because there was a typo. For instance, if the length, the period of serving as a legislator is the same for two members, then the member who obtained more votes in an election should take precedence. Well, in the past, sometimes we have typos or discrepancy between the English and the Chinese texts. Even in oral or written questions, from time to time, we have some minor errors in the numbering. I don't want to blame the secretariat. I would be understanding and sympathetic. Perhaps the secretariat is under tremendous pressure. All right, returning to the subject, I have to talk about incidents, how the president has acted unfairly. In this battle involving the rules of procedure, the pro-establishment members would like to use filibustering and efficient use of council time as strategy to mislead the public. But no one has ever mentioned how come some members have to filibuster on some business. Now, no one has ever mentioned this, and I'd like to say that last year, we filibustered on the following issues: on the Wang Chao incident, funding application that we pressed the administration time and again for more information, and $5.3 million for Disneyland, and even pro-establishment members didn't like it, but they blame us for filibustering, and also collusion between the business and also the government. And we asked for exact figures, and we were accused of filibustering and collocation arrangement, and infinite number of white elephant projects and a severe budget overrun. We want to ask for more information and figures for the sake of the public, so that we can get to the truth. But we are not allowed to do so. The state of this council is very dangerous. No matter how we reason with you. Now, there is no reason why the quorum for committee of the whole committee should be lowered from 35 to 20. Now, we're talking about the same chamber and the same group of people and the different stages of proceedings. The quorum requirement is different. I don't know next time whether you have to wait for somebody before you vote, and if you're caught, I don't know how are you going to put the blame on anybody.
Finally, Mr. President, I appeal to members from the pro-establishment camp to ease off and not to push us into dire straits. We have the godson, goddaughter of the Western District. Please think carefully. Mrs. Regina Ip. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I speak in support of the proposed amendments to the rules of procedure by the pro-establishment camp. Over the past 2 days, I have very carefully listened to the Democrats' speeches. I understand their concern is that after the ROP is amended, this council will change, and they're also worried that their power in this council will be undermined, and they will no longer be able to use the ROP as a weapon to monitor the government, which is part of their duty, and they cannot speak on behalf of the people. I don't think that these are valid concerns, because for members returned by geographical or functional constituencies, they are just the same. Even for FC members, their electors may be companies, but there are persons in charge of these companies, and we are all accountable. We are all afraid of being sacked. So no matter how the ROP is amended, we will try our best to speak on behalf of the people to fulfill our duty of monitoring the government. On the other hand, we've received a lot of amendments to the ROP, which no doubt will enhance the efficiency of the council. And we're also going to update some really out-of-date rules. At the moment, the ROP is really quite lax. We follow the standing orders in the colonial era. Back then, the composition of the council was much smaller. I'll come to the specific rules. For example, why the threshold for presenting a petition is particularly low, and that accounts for the proposed amendment today. And after amending some of the rules, we're going to work harder for the people, Madam Deputy. Well, just like when a meeting is aborted, it would be like school children leaving school, going on with their own work. But once the rule is amended, then as long as the quorum is formed, we can call for another meeting without wasting time, and we can continue to serve the people. The other amendment is about the election of chairman. In the future, it is proposed that the Secretary General will preside over the election process. I think it is very reasonable, because at the beginning of the 6th term of Legislative Council last year, in the election process, several senior members took turns to preside over the meetings. They might have experience as a member, but it didn't mean that they have the experience to preside over meeting for the election of the chairman. So I'd like to refer to another point about the amendment to the presentation of petitions. Yesterday, there was an example. The threshold would be raised from 20 to 35, and that the petition will be referred to the House Committee for further deliberation. In essence, it means that does it mean that the Democrats cannot present a petition and set up a select committee? Not necessarily, because if the petition involves major public interest, for example, if you want to investigate into the link REIT, why would I not support you? Well, yesterday, actually, I only learned about the petition in the 11th hour. When I heard about investigation into the link REIT, I got excited. And then on the other side, those young members just waved at me, urging me to stand up. And there was no reason for me not to do so. Of course, I was unable to persuade Ms. Eunice-Yeung. But Mr. Jeremy Tam afterwards came towards me and thanked me for standing up and asked why Ms. Eunice-Yeung didn't stand up. The answer was that we had no communication. Ms. Eunice-Yeung didn't know in advance, and had they come to tell us that earlier, I would have asked Eunice-Yeung to stand up as well. The rule is flawed because only 1 day's notice is needed. If we were informed much earlier in relation to the investigation into link REIT, of course we would have stood up. And another interesting thing is that just now Mr. Stephen Ho, the tall guy, was there when we were having tea, and he asked Mrs. Ye, but why didn't you ask me to stand up as well? And I told him I had no idea. It was those young members on the other side who waved at me, urging me to stand up. And then even Mr. Ben Chen said I would have stood up as well. So when it comes to matters relating to major public interest, I think that we can set aside our political differences. We're, after all, serving the public. We are not picking on anyone. And I believe that in the future, if you want to present a petition, you can still do so, despite the higher threshold. And once the amendment is passed, the petition will be referred to the House Committee for further deliberation on the setting up of a select committee. And by then, I understand that a lot of members will join the select committee. So about this amendment of raising the threshold for petitions and also for referring the petition to a House Committee, I don't think it will get in our way of monitoring the government, because these are important issues and we need to be accountable to the public. I think that members will actively take part in the process. So I'd just like to very succinctly speak on these amendments. I'd like to reassure members that even after the amendments are passed, we're still attaching great importance to our functions and duties of monitoring the government. And we will continue to conduct investigations or make inquiries in this council under the appropriate mechanism. I so submit, Madam Deputy. Mr. Leung Yu-chung. Madam Deputy, before I begin to discuss the amendments, I'd like to speak on the time limit for members to speak, and also on the voting arrangements, because this time it involves a number of amendments. For the pro-establishment camp, altogether they will have 12 amendments involving 49 amendment proposals and also 45 further amendments. So if each member is given 15 minutes to speak, as we said earlier, it means that we'll only be able to express our views for 17 seconds for each amendment. And also, all the motions will be bundled during the voting process. Some members said that this is the established practice, but it doesn't mean that this is fair, that we should do it like this. What if I'd like to oppose some of the amendments? Well, I asked these questions before. I think that this is also something that we need to amend. Otherwise, such a voting procedure will be an insult on the part of to members as well as to the Council. On the amendment proposals, well, as many members already pointed out, the ROP has been put in place for many years, and it is only reasonable that we make certain amendments to it. As to the direction of amendments, we are in a society pursuing democracy, and we need to democratize our council so that we can express the views on behalf of people and monitor the government. So I don't think that any amendment is unnecessary, but as long as it helps the democratic development and that it is in line with the democratic principle, then these amendments can be passed. But the point is we need to respect the views of the people, especially the views of the minority, how we can respect the views of the minority. And on this front, I'm going to support most of the amendments put forward by the Democrats, especially on the point of the President's duties. I think it is very important that we have this amendment, that the autonomy of the Council should be maintained, because at the moment there is so much unfairness. The Loyalists, the pro-establishment camp constitutes a majority in this Council, such that we have this lackey culture in the Council. If we go on like this, government policies and initiatives will be free from monitoring by the Council, such that the government can do whatever it wants. And in a way, we will not be fulfilling our duty of monitoring the government, and members will not be able to fulfill his or her responsibilities. Because for government policies, they need to be transparent and they also need to be accountable. Madam Deputy, in the interest of time, I'd like to focus on Dr. Fernando Cheung's amendments, because in relation to Rule 2 of the amendment, it is said that members should be allowed to use sign language when they speak in this Council. And in fact, for the United Nations Convention on People with Disabilities, it has taken effect in Hong Kong since 2008. And that is why we have the responsibility of promoting the use of sign language. The Convention stipulates that the sign language for the deaf should be acknowledged under the principle of equality. I don't think many members understand the sign language, but we have at least 150,000 people using sign language as a mother tongue, and these are people suffering from audio impairment. And I also moved a motion before in this Council on making sign language an official language. Now, some members abstained from voting. They are from the establishment camp, and I heard from them later on that they didn't find that time was right for that. It's not that they opposed my motion. They just believed that the development of sign language wasn't mature, and they would later on support my motion. That is why I don't see any objection to using sign language in this Council. I urge members to support Dr. Fernando Cheung's amendments. As for amendments proposed by the pro-establishment camp, I think that they are going against the spirit of democracy. These are regressive amendments. We're turning this Council into the National People's Congress, such that our function of monitoring the government will be undermined, such that we must always say yes to any government policy, so that we'll become nothing but a rubber stamp. And this is really sad. Dr. Martin Liao, on behalf of the pro-establishment camp, has moved a lot of amendment proposals. These are really alarming, especially for the Committee of the whole Council. The quorum will be reduced from 35 to 20. And I'm not going to repeat the legal advice given by the two senior counsel. But since we have divergent views and that it is so controversial and it is not something trivial, it relates to the Constitution. Just like using sign language as an official language, we may bicker on this, but this relates to the Constitution. Well, you've always said that you uphold the basic law. Why is it that if the proposal goes against the basic law, you still need to bulldoze it through, and you even take the lead in doing that? You're a sore loser. You're just bullying us because of the majority rule, so that you can disregard everything else. Another point I'd like to talk about is the presentation of petitions. The threshold will be increased substantially from 20 to 35. Just now, many members have spoken on the merits of the 20-member threshold. To me, this is not really a merit, because even after presenting a petition and a select committee has been set up, it doesn't have any privileges. It does not have any legal effect in summoning the relevant witnesses to attend hearings. This is just better than nothing. Ideally, we should set up a select committee with the power to summon witnesses to attend hearings. Only when we have such a select committee would it be meaningful. In terms of the minority's duty of monitoring the government, it provides a basic safeguard. Like Mrs. Regina Ip said, we should be reassured, because after it is, if it's presented in the council, as long as it is right, you will get the support you need.
But how could we have the support of half of the members? I mean, if we could have had the support of half of the members, I wouldn't have to form a select committee under the petition arrangement. I could have set up a select committee under the Powers and Privileges Ordinance. In accordance with Rule 17, Madam Deputy, call for quorum. Mr. Kenneth Leung has called for quorum. The quorum bell will be rung. Members, please take your seat. Mr. Leung Yiu-chung, please continue. Madam Deputy, I was talking about the 20-person petition. The thresholds to be increased to half of the members, or 35. And then Mrs. Regina said just now, if it's something of concern to the public, she will certainly stand up and be counted, and she'll support it. But then other members said too they would also stand up. But don't just believe what people say. If people care so much, you don't have to tell people, they will stand up. And even your own party member, even you kept asking her, she wouldn't stand up. Why? Because it's against the principle. What principle? That is, there are no orders from above that you should rise, or how dare you rise? That's really the problem. For this 20-member petition rule, this is important. We know we cannot have the support of 35 members, because if we could have 35 members support us, we could set up a select committee under Powers and Privileges Ordinance, as I said, and there would be a better arrangement. So it's exactly because the minority doesn't have the support of enough members. So this is the last, this is a bottom line in monitoring the government. And now you want to take that away as well. So how do we monitor the government? What sort of council is this? So this council will become just a rubber stamp. And this council will just follow the will of the government, and we can't challenge them, we can't monitor them.
I think the happiest in this incident is not legislators, rather the administration, because when you stripped us of this opportunity to monitor the government, then the government will be most happy. Mr. Matthew Cheung said very clearly that before the amendments are passed, he's not going to introduce government motions and bills, because he knows full well that after the amendments are passed, he can do whatever pleases him, and he has no worry for any objection from members of this council. And we don't want to castrate ourselves, because we do not want to deprive ourselves of this right to monitor the government. And what's most unreasonable in these amendments is to indefinitely, to increase the powers of the president indefinitely. What kind of a legislature is this? The president says that it's my decision is final. How is it different from a Chinese emperor? So we call this a parliament. In fact, this is an empire of the president. The president is the emperor, and members have given up the functions of this council. Why have we sunk so low? I really don't know why. How can pro-establishment members give up, surrender their rights by castrating themselves in this way? Now, they have chosen a most opportune time, and that is when 6 members from the Pan-Democrats have been disqualified. You speak so eloquently. You speak how important and how needed the amendments are. If they were true, how come you hadn't proposed the amendments earlier on? It's all because you have seized this opportunity. It is a deliberate and intentional move. It's not because you've seen any problems with the ROP. Rather, you are minded to take this opportunity to belittle our council. You want to turn it to a rubber stamp so that members here will only say yes to all government motions. This incident goes to show that this council has fallen. And please don't be complacent about it. Don't gloat about it, because when you have undermined our right to undermine or to supervise the executive, we are not the greatest victims. Rather, the community stands to lose most, because what we do here will cause further rift and divisions in society. Why can't we focus our efforts on monitoring the executive to ensure that their policies can better benefit our people? Why do we want to undermine our own powers? Why do we have turned the legislature into this stage so that we can't really monitor the executive effectively? May I quote the following: can we all have give and take? Can we all concede a little bit so that we can make this legislature more effective in monitoring the government? That is better than doing it tit for tat, because it's really meaningless and pointless. What benefits are there if we continue to undermine our powers? I think the only consequence is to benefit the people with vested interest. You want to defend their interest. You want them to increase their vested interest, and you have no intention to resolve deep-rooted, deep-seated conflicts in society. I hope we can resolve this deadlock by give and takes. Your time is up. Mr. Cheuk-ting. Madam Deputy, before I speak, may I ask for quorum call? We have a quorum here. Please continue, Mr. Shield. Madam Deputy, I wanted to protest the President's ruling to scrap 14 of the amendments moved by 38 Democratic members, and to allow a joint debate on all 49 amendments only, and we can each only have 15 minutes. But then something happened this morning. I don't want to lodge this protest. I want to pay tribute to Mr. Yu Guangzhong, a very famous poet, a contemporary poet. He once wrote a poem, very relevant, is about nostalgia for our hometown. When I was a kid, nostalgia was homesickness was a stamp, and when I grew up, it was a ticket. I am on this side, my bride is on the other side, and later on, homesickness is just a grave. I am outside and my mother is inside the tomb. Now, homesickness is a narrow strip. I'm on this side and the mainland is on the other side. If I could add 2 more verses. Homesickness now is a tall parliament. I'm on this side and the pro-establishment camp on the other. What has happened to this council? We have this article going viral on the internet. Very soon we can pass amendments to resolve the suffering of the country, and that is it talked about this stalking similarity of legislature in 2017 to the German parliament in 1933. Hitler was elected prime minister of Germany. However, his political party only accounted for 34 seats of the parliament. However, he wanted to pass an enabling act to resolve this pain and suffering of society, so that without approval by the parliament, he can then pass legislation. But to pass an enabling piece of legislation, 2/3 majority is needed. He only had 34% of the seats. However, the Social Liberal Party, another had 20%, Communist Party 17%, and these two parties were against the passage of the Enabling Act. And so he thought of a way. He created a scare. He said that Germany was at the verge of a major revolution by the communists. Unless the act was passed, Germany would live under the terror of the Communist Party. And then on the 27th of February in that year, there was arson of the Parliament building, and Hitler said that it was a sign of the start of a revolution by the Communist Party, and the Nazis, thank God, took over all the offices of the Communist Party, and then they suppressed the members of the Social Democrats. And then at the general election on the 5th of March, the Nazis won 44% of the seats together with those political parties under his terror. In 1933, on the 23rd of March, he got a two-thirds majority support of the Enabling Act. 81 Communist Party members were absent on the day of the voting, and 26 of the Social Democrats were also absent. The Enabling Act 1933 authorized the Nazis to be totally executive-led. They didn't have to be monitored by the parliament, and then the PM and also the president posts were merged into one, and Hitler succeeded and completed his mission of dictatorship. It was a perfect dictatorship. If we put that into our community, we can see the similarity. There, they disqualified MPs, and here, because of interpretation of the basic law by NPCSC, we also disqualified 6 members. And they used a piece of legislation to disable their parliament. And here we also, the pro-establishment camp also take advantage of the opportunity by amending the rules of procedure. And again, the power of this council to monitor the executive, the control executive, is now removed. I think many members have talked about how amending the ROP will make it impossible for us to monitor the government. For instance, amendment to ROP 26, that is to raise the threshold of presenting a petition from 20 members to 35. It would be more difficult for us to present a petition, and the ability of the legislature to look into the conduct of the executive would also be undermined. And as for what Mrs. Regina Ip said, I think we would be too naive to believe her. With this raised threshold, I don't think we can succeed with a petition anymore. Just yesterday, Democrats presented a petition to investigate the selling of properties by the Link REIT, and there was only one, Mrs. Regina Ip from the pro-establishment camp, who supported it. So the conduct of the Link REIT attracted wild public concern, but we only had one supporter from the loyalists. If the threshold is raised, I'm afraid yesterday's petition will be the last. We can no longer succeed in seeking to set up a select committee by means of a petition. Mr. Martineau would also ask that the petition be referred to the House Committee for further action in place of referral to a select committee as it is in Rule 20 now. Madam Deputy, I know you understand that a House Committee is to discuss House matters of the legislature. I find it baffling as to how the House Committee can deal with a petition. This is really removing the LegCo's power to provide checks and balances to the executive. In fact, they do not mean to put check to the government's rights. Rather, they want to put a check to the powers of pan-democrats. And they would also like to change the number to reform a quorum in a committee of the whole council from 35 to 20. Now, if government motions are passed, receive a majority support from members present, then they can be passed. The rules of procedure is to ensure that there can be half of the members of the council present as far as possible when bills are voted on. We want to ensure that our motions are passed are proper and right. There must be sufficient representativeness from the government. Now, if we amend the ROP to serve this political intention, ignoring the original intent of the ROP, we will affect the propriety of the voting results of further bills and motions. Prior to the handover in 1997, back then, the quorum was 1/3 of the total number of members of a council, and that is 20. And then when the basic law was drafted, it was decided that the quorum should be raised to 1/2 of the members of a council. That means it was intended the legislature after the handover should even do better than prior to the handover, and yet we are lowering that to 20, and the threshold would be lower than that prior to 1997. This is frustrating ourselves.
According to BL 75, the quorum of council should not be less than half of the number of present, and this should apply to the whole committee as well. Two council pointed out that Mr. Martin Liao's resolution does not comply with the basic law, and the president says the resolution might not be inconsistent with the basic law. The president listened to the pro-establishment camp instead of the legal advice obtained by LegCo. The pro-establishment camp is taking the lead in skewing the meaning of the basic law provisions, and they have set a very poor example and precedent. Such practices are in breach of the basic law and the spirit of the rules of procedure. The central authorities and the government often talk about compliance with the basic law. So for teachers and adults, what can we say when our children ask us about the spirit of the basic law? The spirit of the basic law has been skewed, and the lowering of the quorum would further harm the LegCo's legitimacy. So what can we say to our children? How can our children come to terms with the basic law, which is ever being amended? Under the small circle election, the Legislative Council's ability to check the government would further be harnessed, and history is being eroded or destroyed. In recent times, we can see that it's not hard to eliminate a legislature, and this is something that is unfolding in front of us. On Mr. Martin Liao's resolution, as I said from the start, I talked about the poet Yu Guangzhong, and in conclusion, I want to mention another of his poems called Waiting for You in the Rain, and I want to quote a few verses. Eternity, the moment I will wait for you in the eternity of time. I sincerely wait for the pro-establishment or pro-Beijing camp to make a U-turn for the better. This is a dangerous time for our legislature. We are at a critical juncture, so by tonight, tomorrow, or 2 days later, the amendments to the ROP would be passed. There is apparently not much I can do now. So I want to send one final warning for Hong Kong people who are still oblivious. We need to defend our legislature. We need to defend Hong Kong. So I'm making this final warning to wake up those who are pretending to sleep so that they can join us in defending Hong Kong and defending LegCo. Have you finished speaking? If you have finished speaking, please be seated. I think we have all heard your signal. Have you finished speaking, Mr. Cheuk-ting? If you have finished speaking, please be seated. Mr. Cheuk-ting, your 15 minutes is up. Please switch off your beeping device. Mr. Cheuk-ting, your time is up. Members, please be silent. I have been tolerant, so please be seated and stop yelling from your seats. Mr. Cheuk-ting, please be seated. Your round is up. Can our staff please remove the beeping device from Mr. Xiu? Ms. Claudia Mo, you are next to speak. Would you like to speak? Ms. Claudia Mo, you are the next to speak. Ms. Claudia Mo, would you like to speak? Ms. Claudia Mo, would you like to speak? If members stop yelling, we can hear what's being said. Ms. Claudia Mo, you are the next to speak. Please return to your seat. I now ask our staff to remove this beeping device from the chamber. Mr. Cheuk-ting, I now warn you, please switch off your beeping device immediately. Such disruption of order is not allowed at the Council. Members, return to your seats. Members, beeping devices are not allowed in the chamber. I have been tolerant towards Mr. Cheuk-ting, and I allowed him to express his views. Please hand this beeping device.
各位議員，
Members, I hope that we would not be constantly interrupted. Please maintain order in this chamber. Please return to your seats. Ms. Claudia Mo, are you unable to speak? Please remain silent. Ms. Claudia Mo, are you feeling unwell? Or if that's the case, I would first invite Professor Joseph Lee to speak. Professor Joseph Lee, would you like to speak? Please hold. Mr. Charles Mok. Some members are using Facebook Live, and as you know, members are not allowed to bring beeping devices into the chamber. I have been tolerant towards Mr. Cheuk-ting, and the device was being passed around. I hope members would not use their mobile phones during meetings. We need everyone's contribution in maintaining order. Ms. Claudia Mo, would you like to speak? You might be feeling unwell, so I would invite our staff to help her leave the chamber. Professor Joseph Lee, would you like to speak? If you would like to speak later, I will allow you to do so. And I'll invite Mr. Lo Ai-kwok to speak first. Professor Joseph Lee, would you like to speak? Madam Deputy, and I seldom talk about point of order, but I would like to raise it now. As I understand, from my professional knowledge, Ms. Claudia Mo is feeling a bit dizzy and she is short of breath, and she needs to sit down and have some rest. So if we agree, we can take a short break and allow Ms. Claudia Mo to take a short break. If members feel that we can continue, then Ms. Claudia Mo would be seated, but you have to deal with the discomfort by Ms. Claudia Mo. We have heard you. I'd like to know about Ms. Claudia Mo's condition from our staff. If necessary, we would suspend the meeting. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong, what is the point of order? So if in this case, should we call the ambulance and send our colleague to a hospital? You know, safety is the most important. Our staff have arranged a wheelchair to help the member in discomfort to leave. So I will now suspend the meeting.